And there shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations, with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear, and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth. For the powers of heaven shall be shaken. One man, one microphone, one mission, one message. True News, the only newscast reporting the countdown to the second coming of Jesus Christ. And now for the most powerful hour on radio, here is End Time Newsman, Rick Wiles.
This is True News, 1 hour of uncensored news, views, and commentary. Welcome to the program. I'm Rick Wiles. Today is Thursday, August 9, 2012. Filmmaker Joel Gilbert will join me later in the program to tell us why he's convinced that Barack Obama's real father is Communist Party subversive Frank Marshall Davis. First, the news. Israel's Haaretz newspaper reports that, according to Western and Israeli intelligence sources, Barack Obama recently received a new National Intelligence Estimate report on the Iranian nuclear program, which shares Israel's view that Iran has made surprising, significant progress toward military nuclear capability. Its contents articulate the views of American intelligence agencies, but Haaretz says the report's conclusions are quite similar to those drawn up by Israel's intelligence community. The White House has not commented. Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak, however, did confirm the newspaper's claim. Speaking on Israel radio today, Barak said that there is a U.S. intelligence report being passed around senior offices, and that, as far as Israel knows, the report has brought the U.S. position over Iran closer to the Israeli position and made the issue more urgent. Mr. Barak also said that Israel will have to make a decision over Iran's nuclear program. Quote, all the options are still on the table, and when we say this, we mean it, he said. A Hezbollah official told a Lebanese television news program that Iran's nuclear program is meant for one purpose, to deal with the Israel problem. Member of Parliament Walid Sekaria, a retired Hezbollah general, told his interviewer on Al-Manar TV Tuesday night that should Iran acquire a nuclear weapon, it would serve Syrian as well as Iranian interests, namely the eradication of the Jewish state. He said, quote, this nuclear weapon is intended to create a balance of terror with Israel, to finish off the Zionist enterprise, and to end all Israeli aggression against the Arab nation. The equation in the Middle East will change, he said. South Korea's Chosun Ilbo newspaper reports that North Korea is weeks away from another nuclear test. Commercial satellite imagery shows recently completed tunnel work. Observers speculate the next bomb test will be based on highly enriched uranium, or multiple bombs will be tested simultaneously using both uranium and plutonium. Russian computer security firm Kaspersky Lab has discovered a new cyber surveillance virus in the Middle East that can spy on financial transactions, email, and social networking activity. The company suspects it was designed in the same laboratories as the Stuxnet and Flame viruses. The Moscow company also said the new virus represents the high end of nation-state sponsored cyber espionage and cyber war operations. New data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture shows that America's drought has worsened. U.S. plains states that produce a significant portion of America's corn and soybeans are being hit harder by excessive drought conditions in the wake of the hottest month on record in the continental USA. The high temperatures and lack of rain broke records set during the Dust Bowl days of the Great Depression. Severe drought punishing the U.S. midsection has sent corn prices soaring by 23%. Meanwhile, dry conditions in Russia have contributed to a 19% increase in the price of wheat. The UN's Food and Agriculture Organization released a statement today warning that the world could face a food crisis by 2013, and a top insurance executive has warned that severe drought will deliver a crippling blow to the reinsurance industry. Mr. Nicholas von Bombard, chairman of Munich Re, said it will be one of the most severe losses ever for the reinsurance market. Mr. von Bombard's company has put aside $200 million in reserves to deal with future crop failure insurance claims. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in America revised its predictions today, saying more named storms are likely in this year's Atlantic hurricane season. The agency now predicts between 12 and 17 named storms from that period, which started June 1st and will end November 30th. The original prediction was 9 to 15 named storms. Jerry Bell, the lead hurricane season forecaster at NOAA's Climate Prediction Center, said, quote, "We are witnessing the likelihood of an above-normal season because storm-conducive wind patterns and warmer than normal sea surface temperatures are now in place in the Atlantic," end of quote. Ian Stewart, a well-known Scottish geologist, delivered a grim prediction yesterday in Brisbane, warning that the risk of disaster has grown because of a growing number of megacities are built on or near major earthquake faults. Large settlements since antiquity, he said, have been based on these fault lines because they help provide water and are usually located near flat plains, ideally suited for growing crops. He said this fatal attraction to dangerous areas was a good thing for a while because historically the trade-off was worth it since earthquakes were rare and most cities were not that large. Professor Stewart said it's only a matter of time before a mega earthquake strikes a major city and results in a death toll unprecedented in human history. Meanwhile, geologists are closely watching a swarm of earthquakes in Southern California that began Tuesday night. And folks in Louisiana are upset over a giant sinkhole that recently opened up in Assumption Parish. Presently, it's 380 feet wide and 420 feet deep. A nearby resident, Mr. Haywood Cavalier, told state officials this week that he knew for months that something weird was happening beneath the ground near his home. He said the shaking was so strong at night he was awakened from sleep. He said the tremors and the mysterious bubbling in the bayou were scaring him. The U.S. Postal Service has its own sinkhole problem. The Postal Service has lost $5.2 billion during the 3 months that ended in June. Just last week, the Postal Service defaulted on a $5.5 billion note for future retiree health benefits. The agency's Inspector General said the Postal Service could face a $100 million cash shortfall by the middle of October 2012. A Reuters news poll of leading economists shows that the fortunes of Spain, Portugal, Greece, and other debt-laden European nations have darkened significantly since June. Most of the economists now expect Spain to request a bailout within months. And Germany's second biggest bank, Commerzbank, is bracing for a worsening of the Eurozone crisis. The bank warned investors in the German government that it would restructure its business and continue to unload toxic assets. The bank said the greatest downside risk remains an uncertainty shock from an escalation of the sovereign debt crisis, i.e., the collapse of the European Monetary Union. Barack Obama and Mitt Romney have found something they both agree on in this year's presidential campaign. Both men oppose the Boy Scouts' ban on homosexuals as members or leaders of Boy Scout troops. A spokesman for Republican Mitt Romney said the former governor is standing by his 1994 statement in which he said, quote, all people should be allowed to participate in the Boy Scouts regardless of their sexual orientation. And Microsoft is teaming up with the New York City Police Department to spy on citizens. The NYPD contracted with Microsoft to develop what is called the Domain Awareness Program, which aggregates and analyzes information from closed-circuit cameras, license plate readers, sensors, and law enforcement databases. Yes, it reminds me of that partnership in the 1930s between Adolf Hitler's Third Reich regime and IBM to use tabulators to count, number, and track Jews. You're listening to True News. Coming up next, filmmaker Joel Gilbert, who says the Mac Daddy's real papa is communist subversive Frank Marshall Davis.
Reporting the countdown to the second coming of Jesus Christ, you're listening to True News, the End Time Newscast.
Jesus has strong words for religious pretenders and comfort for genuine seekers. Here's today's Moment with Charles Stanley.
Jesus condemned the hypocrites, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the religious people of his day who were always trying to put burdens on other people and make them do as they wanted them to do in order to fit their concept and their idea of the law of God. Instead of being freeing by the truth, they were being placed in bondage by the truth. And Jesus, in a scathing denunciation, he called them a bunch of snakes, a bunch of vipers. He said, you're like a bunch of white coffins. He says, you're absolutely a detriment to the nation of Israel. But people in their sinfulness, people in their hurt, people in their sorrow, people in their despair, people in their hopelessness, Jesus was always reaching out, loving them, comforting them, and assuring them of his presence. And whatever it may be the result of some financial loss, it may be the result of a divorce, or separation, or hurt in the family. It may be that you've had bad news about your children. They're off on drugs. Something has happened to them. It may be that you missed that promotion. You didn't get the raise. You're broken up in a relationship. No matter what the hurt and what the despair, listen to this wonderful, wonderful promise from God. The Father of mercies, the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our affliction.
And the first affliction God needs to deal with in a person's life is the burden of sin. Learn about the freedom that comes through accepting Christ's gift of forgiveness when you click All Things Are New at intouch.org.
Welcome back to True News, the voice of the Christian resistance to Barack Obama's communist revolution. I'm Rick Wiles, and I want history to record that I openly opposed the Marxist takeover of the USA. In 2007 and 2008, I declared on this radio program that Barack Hussein Obama, a.k.a. Barry Soetoro, or whatever his real name is a Marxist revolutionary planted in the USA by some unknown foreign power for the purpose of destroying the constitutional republic of the United States of America. That was a very radical statement at the time. In fact, some prominent Washington Republican insiders refused to appear on True News because of my adamant position that Mr. Obama is a communist revolutionary. But with each passing day, more people are waking up to the troubling realization that Mr. Obama indeed is a dangerous Marxist who has already done incalculable damage to America, regardless of whether he remains in the White House another 4 years. The damage is done. It will not be repealed or repaired. For 4 years, we have repeatedly exposed Mr. Obama's connection to Frank Marshall Davis, a known member of the Communist Party USA. My guest today has taken the investigation even farther. Filmmaker Joel Gilbert recently released his latest documentary, Dreams from My Real Father. He's the producer of the film Atomic Jihad, Ahmadinejad's Coming War. The website for the new film about Obama is obamasrealfather.com, obamasrealfather.com. And Joel's on the telephone right now. Joel, welcome to True News.
Hi, thanks for having me today. I'm looking forward to telling you about my new film.
Yes, sir. What motivated you to produce a film about Frank Marshall Davis?
Well, this film, of course, is about Obama and his history. I started looking into Obama simply because I produced this film that you mentioned called Atomic Jihad about the Iranian nuclear program. And in doing so, I looked at probably 100 speeches of Barack Obama and was just looking for little tidbits about Middle East and foreign policy. I noticed that every time he spoke in these speeches about the rich and the poor, suddenly his voice would go higher. He would start yelling, and he would be very excited. He'd go off script, be very happy and euphoric, and then he would calm down again on the next subject. And when I noticed that this occurred consistently over many, many speeches that he gave, I concluded that he had a passion, inner passion for class struggle. But this did not fit the little I knew about Obama's background, that he went to an exclusive prep school in Hawaii, Ivy League education, and Harvard Law. It just didn't seem to fit. So I read his autobiography, The Dreams from My Father, and right away, you noticed, it jumped out to me, all of these references to Marxism. At age 18, he arrives at Occidental College to study with Marxist professors. He only wants Marxist friends. He goes to New York to pursue his interest in activism. He joins the socialist profession of community organizing. He works for Project Vote, Acorn. So very quickly, I realized he had a life journey in socialism based on some kind of Marxist experience in Hawaii that must have been very different from his classmates at this exclusive Punahou school. So I did notice one particular passage that stood out in Dreams from My Father. He said that when his grandfather took him to Frank Marshall Davis's house, the communist propagandist who lived in Hawaii, that, quote, I noticed there was some unspoken, unwritten transaction between Frank and my grandfather. So I thought that was pretty strange. And I decided to look into the history of Frank Marshall Davis. Read his autobiography and looked at other books, and right away from the photos you could see that Obama looked strikingly similar to Frank Marshall Davis, while he looked nothing like the Kenyan Obama.
Now, Joe, let's take a moment and talk about the Kenyan Barack Hussein Obama Sr., who is supposedly his father. What we know about the guy is, we do know that he was a Marxist economist in Kenya, but many times I have heard statements from Barack Obama Jr. about his Kenyan dad that are just absolute lies, fabrications.
Well, let me start by commenting that there is no such person as Barack Obama Sr., because there is no Barack Obama Jr. They intentionally named Barack Obama the president. They named him Barack Obama the second, not Jr. The reason they named him second is because that is another person. Jr. means son of. There is no Jr., therefore the Kenyan Obama is simply the Kenyan Obama, not Barack Obama Sr. There's no reason to give him that designation.
That's a very interesting legal distinction that they made.
Absolutely. Anyway, the Kenyan, all the proof is in that when I read Obama's story of his early childhood, that his loving family was separated when the Kenyan went to Harvard for an education when Obama was 2.5 years old, is absolutely false. It's been proven false. We know that his mother took him to Seattle, where she was enrolled at the University of Washington when Obama was only 3 weeks old, while the Kenyan Obama remained in Hawaii for another year. Only a year and a half later, Obama and his mother came back from Seattle. When the Kenyan applied for extension of his work permit and a visa to extend his education to do a PhD, the INS initially rejected the application because they did not believe the marriage was real. In fact, if it was real, the Kenyan would have simply applied for a green card and citizenship rather than a temporary benefit. So all the indications, all the evidence points to a sham marriage to cover up an illicit affair between Ann Dunham and Frank Marshall Davis. We have in my film, Dreams from My Real Father, evidence and photos we obtained of intimate photos of Ann Dunham at Frank Marshall Davis's house. We also know that it's been proven that when Ann Dunham brings Obama back from Indonesia at the age of 9, she goes back to Indonesia, and immediately Obama is taken to Frank Marshall Davis's house several times a week from age 9 through 18. So all the evidence is in that these were parental visits, and that Obama was, because he shows up at age 18 at Occidental as a committed Marxist, it's very apparent that Obama went through an indoctrination by Davis during his formative years, and that he then pursued his entire life the dreams from his real father. The reason this is critical to understand is because Obama sold himself to America as the multicultural ideal, a man who stood above politics. He said because his father was a goat herder from Kenya, he would bring people together. This was the story that America bought into. Now, the reality is, as I've shown in my film, is that it is much more likely that Obama intentionally hid a deeply disturbing family background to obscure a Marxist political foundation. Now, voters will overlook some fudging by politicians about certain things, but promoting a false family background to hide an agenda irreconcilable with American values is totally unacceptable and a manipulation of the electorate. I am calling on Obama to admit as to who his real family story is, what his real foundations are, and allow the voters to elect him on the merits of his true background and his true ideology.
Joel, obviously there has been a concerted, coordinated campaign to conceal and cover up the true identity of Barack Obama, and that cover-up has had the participation of people in both parties, in my view. I think that there are people in the Republican Party in Washington who fully well know this man is not who he says he is. I believe the news media, the national news media, is actively involved in the cover-up. What do you think's going on?
Well, I believe that Obama's election was not a sudden political phenomenon. It was not a sudden phenomenon. It was the culmination of an American socialist movement that people don't know much about, but that Frank Marshall Davis, Obama's real father, helped to nurture in Chicago and Hawaii, and has been quietly infiltrating the U.S. economy, universities, and the media for decades. I was at the National Press Club last week, and I excoriated the journalists there, explaining to them or reminding them that there's something called the Journalist Creed. The Journalist Creed is like the Hippocratic Oath that doctors have, but for journalists. And it requires journalists to be public trustees, responsible to the public, requires a single standard of truth. They're not allowed to suppress the news, and it tells them that journalists must be unbiased and always unafraid. So I explained to them that what if all the doctors in the country decided to ignore the Hippocratic Oath? We'd all get sick. So I said to them, because they're not reporting the truth about Obama's history and his agenda, that we're all becoming infected with Marxism. And I demanded that they report the truth. Now, I think...
Did you participate in the event with Dr. Paul Kingor and Trevor Loudon and Larry Grathwell? Okay.
Right. I was there. I got 2 standing ovations. And I spoke to the journalists and demanded they adhere to their own journalist creed.
Okay, but the journalists did nothing with that news conference.
The journalists, the few that were there that took it seriously, that wrote good articles about it, and then the ones from the Washington Post and others either made fun of it or ignored it. It was a very important conference, And I think the journalists kind of reflect the political world, because you have the leftist media that refuse to report anything, and a lot of the conservative journalists, honestly, are afraid to report certain things because they're afraid they'll be attacked by the left. I mentioned in my talk at the National Press Club that even Newsmax.com, who I advertised my films on in the past and interviewed me and covered me in the past, were suppressing and censoring me this time around. I paid for
those guys sold out a long time ago.
Yeah, I paid for a banner campaign and asked them to cover it, and they pulled it at the last second. I said, "Why'd you pull my campaign? And why did you pull this subject?" They said, "We want to try to move to the center," as if explaining the truth is a right or a left-wing concept. So I was very disappointed by Newsmax, and I let them know. And I think the political world, Republicans, conservatives, Democrat, the conservatives, I believe, are afraid of being attacked over reporting anything personal about Barack Obama's past. And unfortunately, I think we're all suffering from the inability of the public to really understand what direction we're headed.
Yes. Any explanation? Do you have any guess why federal law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies and judicial agencies have a blind eye towards Obama's identity problems?
My experience in this area is that each federal agency defers to another. The court system defers to Congress. Congress defers to the courts. They defer to the Attorney General's office, who defers to. They all want to pass the buck. None of them have the courage to take on something as monumental as the identity of the President of the United States, perhaps because they know where it might lead, and then they would be under attack and criticism for going into an area that perhaps might not be their jurisdiction.
Yes, but it will get you in the history books as a true patriot.
Well, I told the National Press Club twice when I was there, I said to every journalist in the building, I said, the Pulitzer Prize can be yours. Just watch my DVD and write an article, and you've got it. But no one wanted to win the Pulitzer Prize, even though it would be available for any journalist that would cover this story.
It's because the journalists really like a socialist communist revolution. They're totally comfortable with it, so they're not going to report it. They're finally getting what they've wanted all this time. Joel, let's talk about Frank Marshall Davis. We've talked about this man many times, but every time I have a new guest on the program, we learn something else about Frank Marshall Davis. And we know he was a member of the Communist Party. We know the FBI had an active file on him. What can you tell us? How dangerous of a radical revolutionary was Frank Marshall Davis?
Well, Davis joined the Communist Party in 1932. He began writing for the communist newspapers. He was a journalist. The Communist Party was interested in journalists because they felt they could help spread Soviet propaganda and Soviet influence throughout the United States because of their ability to write in newspapers. And Davis was recruited. He was one of them. And Communist Party was controlled by the Kremlin and funded by the Kremlin through Comintern International. In mid-1940s, the Soviet Union considered U.S. forces in Hawaii to be an obstacle to Soviet expansion in Asia. They decided they wanted to try to expel U.S. forces from the island by taking over the island, allowing for Soviet expansion in Asia. So Comintern International ordered Frank Marshall Davis to Hawaii to organize the trade unions in an attempt to take over the island and expel U.S. military. Davis moved to Hawaii, immediately began organizing with the ILWU, the trade union, and writing for the communist newspaper, the Honolulu Record. And within 1 year, there was a attempted takeover of the island. There was a dockman strike for 6 months that crippled the island, and they were demanding a takeover of the government, expulsion of U.S. forces. At that time, Davis was also in charge of recruiting blacks into the Communist Party. For the most part, he failed because blacks were religious people and communists was atheists, and they were very suspicious of the communists at that time. the strike to take over the island of Hawaii eventually failed, and Hawaii some years later became a state. But Davis continued to write for the Honolulu Record all those years, and he flawlessly mirrored official Soviet propaganda. He condemned the Marshall Plan. He blamed American capitalism for World War II. He demanded takeover of General Motors, socialized medicine, bashed Wall Street. He was...
Wait a minute, that sounds like Barack Hussein Obama today.
Exactly. That's why the name of my film is Dreams from My Real Father, because Obama is pursuing these dreams where it's classic Stalinist Marxist worldview, and you can see it in Obama's rhetoric every day. You didn't build that, someone else did. The top 1%, the breathtaking greed of a few. This is the classic Marxist rhetoric that there's some evil straw man that is keeping the poor people down who don't have the ability to advance themselves because of these evil straw men who are somehow getting rich off of their backs. So every time I hear Obama speak, I hear the rhetoric and the indoctrination of Frank Marshall Davis in this Stalinist worldview. Davis was a big supporter of Stalin, and he was a communist propagandist and no doubt also a Soviet agent.
How closely did the FBI monitor Frank Marshall Davis?
Well, Davis was under surveillance for 19 years. He had a 600-page FBI file. They did bring him before the Un-American Activities Committee and asked him about his Communist Party affiliations, and Davis pleaded the fifth and refused to admit it or talk about it. And he was observed taking photographs of the Hawaiian coastline, which was highly suspicious because Davis, who was a photographer, was mostly photographed nude models and people. He was not known as a landscape photographer, so they suspected he was taking photographs for Soviet intelligence. Davis's relationship with Obama's mother includes him taking many photographs of his mother for men's magazines that he later sold. That's where we discovered the photos.
Now, I was going to ask you if Frank Marshall Davis was the photographer of these racy nude photographs of Ann Dunham.
I believe he was. I actually visited the house and took all the measurements and concluded that this, not only was it, of course, Ann Dunham, but there are other models in the photos that I've identified, and the house itself I've identified, and there are also furniture and other objects that are in photos of Davis. So I've concluded that this is Ann Dunham, and they were at Davis's house, and that establishes the intimate relationship between Davis and Obama's mother. And as I mentioned, Obama comes back from Indonesia at age 9, and his mother says to the grandfather something to the effect of, "I'm going back to Indonesia, but remember that pornographer guy I used to hang around with, 65-year-old pornographer, that's the guy I would like to raise Barry, the communist pornographer. Going back to Indonesia, I would like you to take him to this guy's house a few times a week from age 9. Now, that doesn't make any sense unless Davis is the real father.
What do we know about Ann Dunham?
Well, I think we know very little. All we know is that she was a high school student kid in Seattle. We do know she lived in Lebanon for a year with the parents, that they traveled around a lot. The father had a government gig, which I get into in my film, and that she was torn away from her teenage world in Seattle and dragged to Hawaii against her wishes by the family when she was 17 years old. And she went through a rebellious period immediately, and we believe that's why she got involved with Davis in a rebellious effort against the move, and she won. She ended up back in Seattle going to the University of Washington, which she wanted to do in the first place.
Were her parents Marxists?
I don't believe so. I think that entire concept that they were Marxist or leftist is false, and it's a red herring to misdirect the real source of the Marxism in Obama's life, which was his real father. There's no evidence whatsoever that a 17-year-old high school kid in Seattle, or the mother was a leftist or Marxist, the parents were not Marxist. All my evidence is that the father went to Berkeley, University of California at Berkeley. I pulled his transcript. It's in my film. He went there and studied French, essentially, just for 1 year to get a job in the government. Ended up working for the CIA in Lebanon. The family went there. And it was his job to track Communist Party members, CPUSA in Seattle and also in Hawaii. And he was actually working for the government all that time. So they did join this Unitarian church, but that was a place where all the, the Reds and Communists gathered. So this entire line of thinking that we do hear from time to time that the mother's family was somehow commies is not true. I believe it was all the Marxist ideology comes from Frank Marshall Davis and no other source.
So in your opinion, this rebellious young woman, Ann Dunham, had an affair with the communist Frank Marshall Davis. She got pregnant, and everything else was, after that, was a cover-up of that affair.
Correct. The Kenyan was in Hawaii under something called Operation Airlift Africa. At the time, this was the heart of the Red Scare and the Cold War. The Soviet Union had opened a university called People's Friendship University in Moscow, and they were bringing in African students from these emerging African countries in order to influence them and establish contacts with these African students when they went back to Africa to help control those governments and foment communism in Africa. The United States, to compete with the Russians, started this program called Operation Airlift Africa, bringing over African students to study in the United States, and then the CIA would cultivate them as contacts for when they went back to their country. So we have a photo in my film of Obama's grandfather, Stanley Dunham, at the Hickam Air Force Base, at a military base in 1959, welcoming Barack Obama. There he is, right there they are together in 1959, a year before the family moves from Seattle, because he's working in Hawaii from time to time with Airlift Africa. So it's very clear that, number one, there were very few African Americans or blacks on the island of Hawaii, very few at that time.
The CIA keeps coming into this story.
Yeah.
Joe.
Yeah, I know it. So when when Ann becomes pregnant, it's an obvious connection that Stanley Dunham, the grandfather, knew this Kenyan student, and he was an obvious candidate to be the sham marriage husband, because he was going back to Africa anyway, and he had a temporary benefit to extend his visa and get a work permit. So, again, anyone can see the trailer and purchase the film. It's at obamasrealfather.com.
All right, if I'm following you, what you're theorizing is that Stanley Dunham, the father of Ann Dunham, grandfather of Barack Obama in the White House, that he and his wife were horrified that their teenage daughter was impregnated by a communist Marxist revolutionary. And they obviously knew that the child is going to be mixed race. So in order to cover up the affair with a Marxist revolutionary, it wasn't that they were trying to cover up that she had an affair with a black man. It was a red man. What they were horrified was he's red. He's a communist.
Well, the implication for Stanley Dunham was if his new son-in-law was discovered, and Davis was under FBI surveillance at the time, so if it was discovered that Davis was the father of Ann Dunham's child, then Stanley Dunham would have lost his security clearance at the CIA.
Yes.
And would have lost his job and his pension and everything else.
All right. Do you think that Frank Marshall Davis had targeted the teenage daughter of the Dunhams because her parents were involved with the CIA?
I highly doubt that. We don't know for sure. That's speculative, but I believe it's more likely that Ann Dunham was rebelling and distraught over the move to Hawaii and presented the opportunity to Davis, who was a pornographer, someone who was involved with underage women, and even though he was married, and it was probably somewhat mutual. I don't think she was targeted. That's my opinion.
Do you think that Stanley Dunham went to his superiors in Washington and said, "I have a major problem"?
Well, obviously, the fact that they went to such an elaborate scheme to cover it up, using the Kenyan student to engage in a sham marriage, using the name Barack Obama II for the child. Everything they did to hide it would indicate that he did not try to clear it with his superiors.
All right, I'm going to take the other position. Maybe that explains the present day cover-up, that it is an agency operation for whatever purpose. We don't know what was going on at that time. Maybe the reason officialdom in Washington won't allow a discussion of Barack Obama's real identity was that the agency was involved in this cover-up in the starting point, in the beginning.
Yeah, my comment is I highly doubt that the agency would be involved in creating a cover for an infant. It's way too far-fetched. I think it was simply an illicit affair that everybody, once a pregnancy occurred, had a reason to try to cover up, and they did so very successfully and very quickly. They got the Kenyan to participate. Davis was married at the time, was able to stay out of it. The father was able to cover up the fact that his new son-in-law was a number one communist on the island, and Anne got to go back to Seattle at the University of Washington like she wanted to in the first place. So it was all pretty quick and clean, and that was the end of it. And I don't think anybody could have foreseen at that time that the child would one day enter politics.
So I only have a few minutes. I want to ask you about the connection with Sotoro in Indonesia. We know that the guy in the White House operated under the name Barry Soetoro when he was, at least in his 30s. He was in college. He was Barry Soetoro. In high school, he was Barry Soetoro. In primary school in Indonesia, he was Barry Soetoro. When was his name changed from Barack Obama II to Barry Soetoro, and when was his name changed from Barry Soetoro back to Barack Obama? Where's the paper trail of court cases? Who are the judges that changed his name? What court did this?
We don't have any court documents of any kind that indicate any of those things. My study of the timeline is that Barack Obama II was Barack Obama II until he was about 6 years old when the family moved. His mother married Lolo Soetoro, and they moved to Indonesia. He took the last name of Soetoro for those few years in Indonesia.
But was it done by an Indonesian court?
We don't know. We don't know if he simply took the name because in Indonesia, a Muslim country, you're better off going to school and entering school under the auspices of a local person with a local name and a local religion.
But when he came back to the United States, for many years into his adulthood, as a student, as a young man, he was still signing his name Barry Soetoro. He was swearing on documents. My name is Barry Soetoro. I mean, that's fraud. That's a criminal act.
I'm not aware of any of that. I have all the evidence that when he came back to Punahou School at age 9, he was entered there, and I've looked at all the yearbooks of Punahou School from those age 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way through high school, and he was always Barry Obama, which was the kind of the Americanization of Barack. So I'm not aware of him using the name Barry Soetoro except for those couple of years in Indonesia.
Okay, so he blended the names. He came back as now he's not Barack Obama, now he's Barry.
Well,
Obama.
Barry was a nickname, an Americanized nickname of Barack that they called him at some point, but it was always either Barack or Barry Obama throughout high school and throughout all those years. I'm not aware of him ever using the name Barry Soetoro.
Do you think Obama even knows who he is?
I'm certain that he's aware that Frank Marshall Davis is his biological father. He knows very well also that Davis is his ideological father. He admits that when he was 12 years old, in his own Dreams from My Father autobiography, he talks about finding his birth certificate at the age of 12. And he also, of course, has gone through a lot of intentional effort to hide the role of Frank Marshall Davis in his life. I'll give you several examples. Number one, on my website, I released a photo that is on Barack Obama's own Facebook page. There's a photo of him in Honolulu at age 12 with his mother, grandfather, and half-sister at the Honolulu airport. I've shown the evidence, and you can see that on my website, and also even look on Obama's own page, that his mother, Ann Dunham, who's a thin white female, has the hand of a black male. They've photoshopped out Frank Marshall Davis and airbrushed in Ann Dunham to hide the fact that Davis was with Obama at the airport. It's very obvious.
Joe, when I saw that photograph, I was like, okay, this can't be real. Is this for real? I mean, it's very obvious. The hand coming around the waist is black, but it's connected to a white person.
Right. It's also a male hand that's much larger, even size-wise, and it's also forward. So if you go to Barack Obama's Facebook photo page, you'll see that photo and all the comments where everybody says this is obvious forgery. So Obama has gone through a lot of effort using document manipulation, forgery, and omission to try to hide the role of a Communist Party propagandist and Soviet agent as his biological father, because people would then put together the fact that Davis was also the ideological father, and this story of a Kenyan goat herder who was going to bring people together would simply fall apart as a fairy tale.
Do you think that Barack Obama in the White House is an active communist agent?
I think you can call it whatever you want to call it. There's many names for it. I think he has the ideology and worldview of the classic Marxist, Stalinist, the way that he approaches economics, foreign policy, blaming America for all the world's ills, blaming capitalism for all the problems of the world. And these communists and socialists, their basic flaw is that instead of comparing America to the rest of the world, they compare America to a socialist utopia. So for these people, America is hell, and they're always trying to achieve a communist socialist utopia through this flawed ideology of Marxism. The results are in for Marxism. So societies that employed this model led to economic ruin and physical annihilation.
But have you considered the possibility that he is an active participant in a Marxist conspiracy?
I have not considered that. I think the things that are relevant are his ideology, his goals. I think the fact that he is hiding something as big as who his real father is very dangerous, because foreign intelligence agencies, no doubt, have figured this out a long time ago. If I could figure it out, they could too. And that's why when we saw Obama with Medvedev, the president of Russia, when he leaned over with the microphone on and said, after the election, I'll be more flexible, and then Medvedev says, I'll transmit this information to Vladimir. It's like a James Bond movie. It, makes your skin crawl.
Well, that's why I'm saying I think he's an active communist agent.
I think I wouldn't agree with that, because I don't know. But I would say that Putin and the Russians know very well, and they've got something on Obama. Simply, they've got it on him, as probably many intelligence agencies do, that, hey, your Kenyan father fairy tale, we can blow that up if you don't help us out with this or this or that. So when the President of the United States has such a secret, it is very, very dangerous to the country. Think about Bill Clinton.
Because he can be blackmailed.
He can be blackmailed. I've talked to people in the intelligence circles, and they all believe, for example, strongly possibility that Bill Clinton's phone calls to Monica Lewinsky on cell phones were monitored by foreign embassies. And
well, we know, Joel, that, I mean, one of the first things that Bill Clinton did was put in a new phone system at the White House, and the phone system was built by an Israeli company. Well, guess who monitored the phone calls? The Israeli Mossad. I mean, that was a no-brainer, what was going on in that situation. I think Monica Lewinsky, personally, I think she was a Mossad plant. That's my own opinion. But I think they were
kind of far-fetched.
Well, not in the world I live in.
Well, I think it's more. Look, the Secret Service would never allow any phone system installed by anybody without debugging it completely. I think in that scenario, it's more likely every embassy in Washington has listening devices shooting out all over the city looking for any kind of information. And the concern was that, for instance, China was granted most favored nation status in the 90s. This was a designation usually reserved for small upcoming countries like Ecuador or Bolivia. They're trying to help them out. So that was very curious that China would get most favored nation status, and the concern was that somehow the Chinese embassy was able to pick up on these phone calls.
Yeah, well, there's Chinese generals that were coming into the White House, too, with all that money. That was there was a connection in that one, too. Hey, listen, appreciate you being on True News today. The film, Obama's Real Father, that's the website, too, obamasrealfather.com. Get a copy of this DVD. Show it to everybody. I mean, pass this thing around. Tell everybody you know about it. People need to know the truth. This is life and death for this country. It is life and death. I am convinced this man is a Marxist revolutionary. We might as well have elected Fidel Castro or Hugo Chavez. We have a very dangerous man in the White House right now. And the film is Obama's Real Father.
That's Dreams from My Real Father.
Yes. Dreams. The website is Obama's Real Father. Excuse me, obamasrealfather.com. And the film is Dreams from My Real Father. And the producer, filmmaker is Joel Gilbert. Joel, thank you. Appreciate you being on True News today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
You're listening to True News, the end-time newscast. Rick will return after this announcement.
This is Max McLean. In response to God's great salvation, how then should we live? Listen to the Bible from 2 Timothy 2. Flee the evil desires of youth and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart. Don't have anything to do with foolish and stupid arguments, because you know they produce quarrels. And the Lord's servant must not quarrel. Instead, he must be kind to everyone, able to teach, not resentful. Those who oppose him, he must gently instruct, in the hope that God will grant them repentance, leading them to a knowledge of the truth, and that they will come to their senses and escape from the trap of the devil. From 2 Timothy 2. Listen to the Bible. It's great for the soul.
Yesterday's program, I mentioned that I want to spend the month of August talking about the blessing of the Lord. In Deuteronomy chapter 28, it says, "The Lord shall command the blessing upon thee in thy storehouses, and in all that thou settest thy hand unto, and he shall bless thee in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee." There is something called the blessing of the Lord. And I really want to encourage you to get into the Word of God and study the blessing and what it means to bless somebody and what it means when God blesses you. You know, we say, "Oh, may the Lord bless you," but do we really understand what we're saying? God bless you. There is something called the blessing. Well, I want to share with you a true story. Some years ago, when we were still located in Texas, and my son Jeremy had just graduated from college. He was working with us at True News. He was the producer of the program. My daughter Carissa was the office manager, and this would have been sometime, I guess, around 2004. At that time, Jeremy had just started to learn about video editing and film production. He was very new at it, but he also had a fascination with biblical archaeology. Well, here's what happened. One night, I was at home praying, and I distinctly heard the Holy Spirit say, I want you to release your son and daughter from working at the ministry. I knew I heard it, and I didn't want to accept in my heart what I heard, but I knew it was the Lord. He said, I have other work for your son and daughter. I want you to lay your hands on them and bless them and release them from this ministry. Well, I cried as a father. I really didn't want to do this, but I knew the Lord told me to do it. Well, the next day was Thursday, and I forgot about it, quite frankly. And on Friday, as I was driving into the office, the Holy Spirit spoke to me and said, you didn't obey me. I want you to do this today. So I called the family together, and I told them what the Lord had said to me. And I had Jeremy and Carissa get down on their knees, and I laid my hands on their heads, and I released them from the True News Ministry, and I blessed them. I blessed them that they would go forth into the world and do the work that God had for them. Well, let me tell you what happened. About an hour later, Marshall, my son-in-law, who was not married to, I don't think he was married to Carissa at that time. I think he was just, they were engaged. Marshall came in the office and he said, hey, I got to show you this article I saw from Australia. No, it was from New Zealand. And it was about an archaeological team going to Turkey to do an expedition at Mount Ararat in search of Noah's Ark. And I said to my son, Jeremy, I know we have listeners in New Zealand. I'll email them and ask them if they know these people. We got an email back, and our True News listener in New Zealand said, yeah, I know this man that's leading this team, and here's his phone number. And by the way, I passed your email on to him. Well, here's what happened. Several hours later, Carissa walked into the office. Her eyes were big, and she goes, Jeremy, there's a man on the telephone from New Zealand. He wants to talk to you. We were all standing there listening to Jeremy talking to the man, and the conversation ended with Jeremy with a big smile, and he said, yes, sir. Yes. I'll meet you there, yes. Hung up the phone. He goes, Dad, you're not going to believe this. He said, this biblical archaeological team is doing an expedition to Mount Ararat at the end of the month, and they want me to join them and videotape the entire trip. He said, I'm going to Mount Ararat in 30 days. My friend, that happened because I spoke a blessing over my son and daughter. I laid my hands on their heads. I spoke the blessing. What are you speaking over your family? What are you speaking over your marriage? What are you speaking over your finances? What are you speaking over your sons and daughters? What are you speaking over your spouse? Make sure you're speaking the blessing. There is power in your words. Make sure you are speaking the blessing. But even more importantly, seek the Lord, seek the blesser. Ask Him to bless you. And understand what it means to be blessed by the Lord. There is something called the blessing. The Bible says, the blessing of the Lord, it maketh rich, and He addeth no sorrow with it. Don't be afraid to ask the Lord to bless you. He's your Father, and He loves you.